Sunday night Safran, a babble about religion, politics and all things ethnic, with John Safran and Father Bob Maguire.
G'day, dear listeners. G'day, Father Bob Maguire.
Jono.
Now, I notice I'm actually a bit disturbed. You've got a,
Bit disturbed,
a
are
walking
you?
stick
Yeah, I've got a
with
walking
you.
bloody stick now.
Is that like full time?
Oh, look, it's until I work out how to get rid of the damn thing. Because I'm gone in the quads. So I've got a new name now. I like Latin. Glutinous Maximus. Because that's what the bloke said. He said, the trouble with you is, what? I said, he said, you've lost... The quads are supposed to drive the legs.
Yes.
Your legs aren't being driven, he said, because the arse, excuse me, is driving the legs. And they're not supposed to. So you're going to end up weaker until you exercise the quads. So then I can throw the damn stick away. But it makes you feel old, doesn't it? You got a shock, didn't you? You thought that the brain had gone too.
I've just never seen you with a walking stick before.
No, you were helpful. You said, oh, God, you were crippled.
I wonder...
Isn't it? Thanks for that.
This is like the it's like, let's figure out Triple J's target audience.
Yeah.
And then have a conversation about the opposite. That's what we've got here.
God.
Walking sticks. We'll be talking more about walking sticks, kids, afterwards.
Oh, God.
It's interesting you have a walking stick. It's a bit, what's the word I'm looking for?
It's a bit, countercultural or what? It's
no,
a bit, what? It's a bit,
portent?
A portent?
It's a portent. Is that the
oh,
word?
My God, an omen.
Because
of
this
things
week,
to come.
all four of our guests
Yeah.
are related to the body.
Yeah, well, that's what I bought. I thought I'd empathise.
Scadden said we have to start having theme shows next year,
Yeah.
so there's like a bit of a rehearsal.
Yeah,
So
well, I knew that, so I decided to empathise by appearing to have gone in the body.
Now we're going to have Eric Sprague, the lizard man from Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Yeah.
He's converted himself to a lizard. We're going to be talking to Dr. Dane Herr, who is part of Access Consciousness, TM, some kind of get your spirit in touch with your body.
I like all that stuff.
Did you read it? There were a few expressions that were kind of making me think of Scientology.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, that's all right.
He grew up, had a very tough life.
Yeah.
He was the only Caucasian in a black area and got beaten up all the time. And then he had to go off and like explore different ways to free himself.
Yeah.
And then he ended up being somewhat a guru for this access consciousness. Of course, he says he's not a guru. We're also going to be talking about Transableism. Do you know what that means? That's where you wish you were in another body.
You were in another body.
And some people even wish they were in bodies that disabled people have.
Yeah.
We have Fiona A. Kumari Campbell and Stella Young. Fiona's, she's just looked into this, and Stella is properly in a wheelchair herself. Editor of ABC's disability portal,
Yes.
Ramp Up.
It appeared on Q&A last week.
Then finally we're going to be talking about otherkin, where a human who can identify themselves as a human and a non-human,
Yeah.
either at the same time or at different times.
Yeah, I like that.
So, you might think you're a spirit cat or something.
Yeah.
Hey Bob, I got a phone call from your biographer during the week.
Sue Williams. Was she looking for dirt or what?
Yeah, she was shaking me down for dirt.
How'd you go? Did you
I
make
said-
it up?
No. I was loyal. I only told the story. The only...
Dirty.
I said I
What?
wasn't going to tell any stories about you.
Yeah.
But then the one about you and the cross-dressing cigar shop owner.
Oh, God. You didn't mention the place.
It slipped out.
Because you made that up.
I didn't make it up, Bob.
I still don't know of having identified anybody in that shop as being a cross-dressing person.
That's because he only does it at night. Dear listener, I'll say this really fast because I've told this so many times before, but this is true. I'm at a regular party, not a dress-up party. Not a dress-up party. And this cross-dressing man comes up to me, like in a dress, and he says, hello. And I say, oh, hello. He goes, I know one of your friends. And then I say, who? He goes, Father Bob Maguire. And I thought I'd finally uncovered you.
Exactly.
In some eyes wide shut,
secret
underground,
50 Shades of Black.
But then he said the reason he knew you is because he owns the cigar shop.
Yeah, when I used to
in
smoke.
in the arcade, and you come and buy cigars off him.
Yeah, but tell the audience that in fact I gave up smoking years ago, 5 years ago.
Okay.
You see? Otherwise it's not balanced. So that's the only thing you could come up with. Eh?
Yes.
What'd she say? Oh, well, thanks for that, but that's of no help whatsoever.
Not as bad as your other biographer. To
What?
your listeners, but Father Bob had another
Oh,
biographer.
he was in there this morning, my other biographer, who's going to do, I think, a second volume.
Oh, really? How many of the first have sold? I say there's two other biographers. If you want to know, if you've ever wondered why Father Bob has such a large head, it's because there's several biographers running around after him.
Well, the first one died.
I know, he died. He's the one, I went drinking with him. He tried to get me drunk, this guy, so I would squeal on Bob.
Well, to ask about my sexual proclivities. What are proclivities?
I don't know. Are they like portents?
I don't know what they are. No, but they might be appendages that I haven't even learnt about. But we'll learn all this in a minute because
she says she's got the manuscript from the biographer who died.
Yeah, I think so. I think she did.
And that there's stuff in there.
Oh, dirt.
Yeah,
because the first bloke, because he was the first cab off the rank. And, I would have thought that anybody going into the place where we were working would be quite fascinated by the history of that place with so many, what shall I say, street kind of people hanging around. Mm. One could come to the conclusion that this may in fact be a coven.
A coven.
I don't want to go any further on all that because the book is yet to come, isn't it?
We're going to
How's
be
your
talking.
book going?
My book's going okay. Let me tell you, I'm going to be spending my 2 months in summer, like in lockdown. I'm a bit behind in handing it in.
Are you?
I've been driving up to Ringwood because this woman's helping me transcribe all my interviews that I did overseas. Yeah. That's
big. A long way, Ringwood into
Unfortunately,
the bush.
it's so annoying. There's I guess there's two, what's the word, protagonists in my book. One didn't have a formal education. Very interesting. Didn't have a formal education. I spoke to him for hours over the phone. So it's all this crackly. It's like hours and hours of that. That if you listen to it long enough, a bit like I've become his name's Vincent. I've become the Vincent whisperer. Where when I listen to them enough times, I can pick up on his jargon. But it's it's exhausting.
Oh, God, yes.
Why didn't I do this earlier? Earlier when I had all this extra time before the deadline, there I was, you were
with
the pina colada by the side of the pool going, oh, it doesn't matter. I've got the whole year to hand this in. And now the gun's to my head.
You got 2 weeks or something.
Anyway, it's all under control. Don't panic. We'll be talking to a lizard man. The lizard man, even. Head to toe, he's made himself a lizard. For real. Well, sort of, in so much as tattooing yourself is for real. Making you a lizard. After this.
Tonight, Sunday night Safran gets under your skin and into your body.
Triple J.
Tonight on the show we'll find out what it means to be transabled. Plus, did you know there are people who identify as non-human? They're called the other kin. We'll find out all about them later, so make sure you stick around for that.
This is Sunday Night Safran. I am that Safran. Over there is that Father Bob Maguire. And we have Eric, the lizard man, Sprague, joining us.
Yes, you do.
So how would you describe your shtick?
My shtick. I would describe myself as a body-based performance artist who makes his living doing stand-up comedy and sideshow stunts.
And your look?
My look is a reptilian-themed full-body transformation.
And that's what we'd understand as tattoos.
Well, and not only tattoos, but also surgeries and other body modification procedures. For instance, I've not only had 700 hours of tattooing that covers me top to bottom, face included. I've also had Teflon grafted to my skull to create horned ridges over my eyes, my teeth filed down into sharp points, and my tongue bifurcated, split into like that of a snake.
Now, this is radio, but me and Father Bob, as
right.
two adult men over bar mitzvah age, because that's what you need to be witnesses in Torah law.
Oh,
right. Yes, you are officially adult. Yes,
we can say this man in front of us is green.
Yes, I am.
And you've got a little scale pattern on your on at least your arms.
Well,
and your
on
face.
my entire body, really.
I see you chickened out of the palms of your hands.
Well, it's not so much chickening out; it's the fact that the skin on the palms of your hands
doesn't work.
Is much different. Yeah, tattoos on the palms of the hand are very rarely done, and they often end up just looking horrible. So they are often, the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet are the areas that are traditionally left on loan because they're just bad canvas.
this is this conversation that everyone thinks when I bring it up is like weird and awkward, but they can't quite pin me on it about why it's weird and awkward. But African Americans have white palms.
Yeah.
And once you hear that, and then every time you see an African American, you look at their palms, and you're like, what? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, obviously it's melanin content, and again, that just drives home the point that the skin on the palms of the hands is different than the rest of the body. Regardless of your racial background, which would determine genetically the melanin content in the rest of your skin, the skin on the palms of the hands is basically something we all share because as we've evolved, there it is. This is what works.
Now, comedy tradition, most people would understand what that's based on. Is the whole full body tattooing some part of some tradition and some history that most people don't know about?
I do see myself as part of a longer tradition. If you go back, the first human being sort of exhibited as a tattooed person occurs in roughly the early 1600s and then develops as more and more people you find exhibiting themselves and their tattoos. Sometimes they're indigenous people that were brought back to the West. Sometimes they're Westerners who chose to become part of indigenous cultures and then return.
So that one in the 1600s, was that a person voluntarily like tattooing themselves and saying, this is who I want to be? Or was it like a P.T. Barnum circus sideshow manager?
Yeah, obviously, centuries before P.T. Barnum, but in that vein. But it was a voluntary thing. It's not there are horrible stories of exploitation of people being kidnapped and taken back. But the first example we have of a person being exhibited as a tattooed person was an island native who voluntarily returned with one of the first expeditions to the at the time it was the Isle of Capri. I'm not sure what the name of the region is now. And it was a prince known as Omai, O-M-A-I. And his name actually inspired one of the people that I take as an influence from the golden age of circuses, the Great Omi. But yeah, he accepted an offer from the ship's captain to return to his homeland because they were just as fascinated by these white people on a boat that showed up in their land as the white people that showed up in a boat were fascinated with them. So he went back to England and ended up doing a sort of a small tour being exhibited. And one of the things that was most commented on were his tattoos, which were not extensive and not particularly dramatic, but were part of his culture. And after a couple of years, he returned back to his homeland on another ship.
And what about people who, like you, who are so referencing one creature like the lizard man? If we go back 100 years, were there like other lizard men?
Not other lizard men, but over the years there have been different people who have chosen different animals and different themes to tattoo their bodies. Omi, who I mentioned, he wasn't specifically referencing a zebra, but because he chose black stripes over his body, he was often described as the zebra man. There have been at least 2 different men and 1 woman who have covered themselves in leopard spots. There is currently now Dennis Abner, who's known as Stalking Cat, who has followed a spiritual tradition from his Native American heritage to transform himself into a version of a prehistoric tiger that existed on the mainland of North America.
Wow. Because
there is a totem tradition in his tribe of becoming your totem animal.
And why did you choose lizard? It's not just aesthetic?
It is 2 reasons. The first is aesthetic, as you mentioned, because my background and my motivations are art and performance art related. The first one is, if you're going to transform your body, the first question is, well, into what? And I considered a whole range of options, but settled in on this because...
what were some of the others?
Oh, yeah. Polka dots, a maze, a story, X's, skulls, all sorts of different design ideas. I kept a notebook when I first had the idea and sort of developed out of that. But the reason I settled in on the reptilian motif is not only because I think it looks good, the same way you might choose a shirt or a wardrobe. I just chose mine for life. But also because no matter where you are in the world, any culture, any time, the reptile is a powerful symbol. As an artist, I'm, of course, drawn to powerful symbols, and I saw this as an opportunity to become one myself.
Wow, and it's referencing the land animal, the lizard. It's not referencing because I looked at you and I thought, a bit of H.P. Lovecraft, and it's kind of like
I'm a big fan of Lovecraft,
an aquatic kind of one of those mysterious aquatic creatures.
Right. Well, it is reptilian and not fish. And one of the easy ways you can tell that if you're looking at a scale, the difference between reptile scales and fish scales is reptile scales come to points, fish scales are rounded.
And do you think, do you internally change once you do things like this to your body?
I really look at it as making my external appearance better reflect my internal ideas and views. And a lot of people have said that, like they've asked, have you become a different person, or were you trying to change the person you were? And I'd say absolutely not. This is not a transformation of myself in terms of who I am. It is an expression of myself and who I am.
And do you think, like for you personally, is it not that melodramatic, and it's just like, other people think it's melodramatic?
Right.
And for whatever reason, in your head, it's just a thing.
Yeah, to me, this is me. And I think the people who have the best perspective on that are my parents. And if you were, like, a lot of people look at me and they think, in their heads, they create this scenario where I just woke up one day and did this. And that wasn't it. This has been a very long, natural, organic process. My parents have watched me develop. I often compare it to, say you were looking at the works of Picasso, but you didn't have the middle. All you had were student sketches, and then you had cubism. And you would wonder, how did this happen? People say the same thing to me. They see a picture of me as a kid, perfectly normal. They say, how did this happen? Well, I'm like, from that picture, you can't tell that kid was already thinking about the things that led to me to this. My mom has actually said of me, to her, it would be stranger if I wasn't Lizard Man.
Now we're going to go to a song and come back with more after this.
Tonight, Sunday night, Safran gets under your skin and into your body.
Triple J. You're listening to Triple J. Still to come tonight, we'll meet Dr. Dane here, a man who claims your body is a compass. Plus we'll find out about Transableism. It's a community of able-bodied people who believe they should be disabled. So stick around for that.
This is Sunday Night Safran. I'm John Safran. That's Father Bob Maguire. And joining us is a man who is green from the top of his head to the
tip of my toes.
His name's Eric the Lizard Man Sprague, and he's in Australia as part of Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Yep, this one you can believe.
Now, you mentioned before that one of your colleagues became a cat because of spiritual reasons. Is anything going on like that inside yourself?
For me, no. I'm actually, I think the best way that I could describe myself is probably as an atheist. I have no spiritual tradition that I particularly follow. I've been very interested and studied a number of them. I think that if that's your thing, that's fine, but it just hasn't been mine in my life so far.
And do you reckon, is there anything we don't know about you that once we unlock that mystery, we'll go, oh, that's it? Like at the end of the film, like the M. Night Shyamalan, where there's this missing fact that changes everything. Like, will we find out that, you were bullied for, like, your entire school years, and then we'll go, I can imagine.
Unfortunately, those are great plot devices in movies and books, but real life just isn't like that. I think that, there's nothing that I could say that is the big key. I mean, we can all play that game. We could say, why did you end up in broadcasting? And we could look back and say, oh, you talk to your toys as if they were an audience. You can cherry pick, but the reality isn't like that. We are the results of many different influences and forces throughout our lives. And, that is who I am as well.
What countries have you been to? And have people just totally, like, been baffled way more than like a Western audience is baffled when they see you?
I think for me, I try not to generalize too much. I mean, obviously, I celebrate my own individuality, and I like to respect that in other people. But with that said, I have had the luck and opportunity to travel across 5 continents, over 20 different countries. And there are definitely some differences, in different places. And it varies even within them from, like, cities to rural areas and stuff like that. But the most common thing is basically the double take and the stare, and people wondering exactly what's going on. And fortunately, often in a very positive way. I was a little bit, one of the reasons I was so cautious in developing is I kind of thought, how much am I going to ostracize myself from the rest of the world by doing this? But the result has been the very positive surprise of finding out that most people are just genuinely curious and very, very nice about it.
And no one's angry at you?
Well, I wouldn't say no one. I think that no matter what you do in life, there's going to be somebody that's going to criticize you and hate you. There are often people, in my experience, it's often been people that have sort of very extreme fundamentalist views, like in the States, where they give you that whole, your body is a temple, you shouldn't have done this to yourself. And, but I think that, like most hate and most prejudice, it comes from a fear and a lack of understanding. And when I'm given the chance to dialogue with people, even if they don't say, okay, it's all right, they often come away with an understanding of me that makes them more forgiving of it.
When did you start the modification?
I started when I was 21 in 1993, but that was after 3 years, as I said, of planning and consideration. The original idea came to me when I was about 18.
Yes. And the ferrets?
Well, you've aged very well.
No, thank you.
If you're 21.
I'm 40 now, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do the ferrets react?
You know, ferrets react to me like they react to anyone, which is play with me and give me food.
Yeah. So that they're not nervous.
Oh, no. I mean, and I absolutely adore it. It's strange to some people, but again, it's one of those things that if you get to know me, it becomes very clear. They're like, you don't have lizards? Those aren't your favorite animal? And I'm always like I said, it's an aesthetic choice and a symbolism choice. But yeah, ferrets would definitely be my favorite animals, and I love them to death.
What I was thinking when I was saying before, do people get angry at you or they bully or whatever? What's like one of the great things about this angle you have is what can they really pin you on? Because usually, if they go after an artist, it's like, oh, that's so gay. But this isn't gay.
Right.
Or it might be,
it's not
you're trying to be
straight.
You're trying to be an elitist. This isn't trying to be, you're trying to be a hipster. It's like, what actually is this that they can pin you on?
Well, it's the whole thing. I mean, getting angry at me for what I've done is getting angry at someone for being themselves. And the other thing is that, I would never say to someone else that you should get tattooed or you should split your tongue. I don't do that. What I say to other people is, look at the principles that I represent. The example that I set is not go out and get tattooed. The example I set is figure out who you are and live your life as yourself on your own terms without hurting anyone. That I think is the big one where people if they want to try and criticize me, I'm like, I welcome your attempt, but ultimately what are you saying? What bad thing have I done? I've never harmed another person. I am only, albeit a little bit weird, I am only trying to bring joy and wonder to the rest of the world, make the world a more interesting place.
Yes. So looks don't matter.
Right, yes, it's content.
It's the person within.
Yes, absolutely.
That matters. And that would be your achievement, that so many people around the world in your experience, in fact, do notice that.
Yes,
and take you on as a person.
And I think that's a big thing, is that people sort of on an instinctual level, they look at me and they see that it's not a scattered thing, it's not a random thing, it's obviously a planned whole. And I think that, without any actual talking, immediately communicates to them, this is somebody who is doing this with a purpose.
Yes.
And then they just want to know the purpose, and I'm always happy to share.
Yeah.
It's a good green. It's hard to get across, but it doesn't come across at all threatening. I don't know what I was thinking in my head, but for some reason it's not threatening.
Well, yeah, it's funny. Like, sometimes people will look at pictures and they'll be like, oh, people must be scared of you. You must scare little children or whatever. And I'm like, it's hard. That just tells you. I mean, I'm sure I can find. We do it with politicians all the time, right? If you're on one side, you always use the picture of the politician from the other side that looks the worst. So you catch him in mid-word or something like that unflattering photo. Well, a lot of photos of me look like I might be scary, but I think if you meet me, I obviously don't have that demeanor.
Now, relationships.
I've been married, will be 9 years in a couple of weeks in November.
Wow, so she met you whilst you were...
Yeah, I was on tour performing. The very first time I came through Austin, Texas, she came out to the show, and as we jokingly like to say between each other, she's the groupie I kept.
And does she have any tattoo shtick going on?
She does. She has a back piece and a number of other tattoos, some scarification as well, but she works as a nurse in the neurology department, and when she's in uniform working at the hospital, you can't see any of it.
And what about her parents? Were her parents... kind of a bit apprehensive that she was dating a guy who was a lizard?
When I came into her life, her father had already passed, and her mother was just genuinely happy that she had found somebody that made her happy. And again, kind of like our conversation here, like I said, you didn't really know what to expect from the pictures, but once I got to meet her mom and talk to her, she was, again, just very happy that she had met someone that was going to be good to her and made her happy.
And is it the one thing I find interesting that goes against what I feel? I like hiding sometimes.
Right.
I like this in between space where I can be in the corner, out in the world with the air blowing in me, so I'm not hidden away in my flat, but I'm kind of a bit invisible. Now you can't do that.
Yeah, exactly. That is one of the sacrifices that I have had to make, and I consider it a very small sacrifice compared to the benefits that I have reaped. But, that said, everybody has their good and bad days. Sometimes I think everyone wants to be invisible. In my case, I have to just basically choose to not leave the house those days if I can.
And you also must feel, in a good way, you must feel this pressure a bit to kind of go against preconceptions. Like, if you suddenly kind of went crazy and got drunk and started, like, punching people in the street, it'd be like, oh, my God, the lizard man.
The lizard man.
It's gone crazy.
He's gone Godzilla.
And
He's destroying the city.
He's gone Godzilla, and you're sort of like, you've tarnished almost what your point is, which is you can look like this, but that don't make any assumptions.
You can still be a good person. And I actually, like you say, it's a constraint, but it's one that I welcome because, if I have, and I think it's a very human thing. We all have moments where, something is frustrating us, it's getting on our nerves. You meet that person that's just needling you in just the right way, and you're thinking, oh, there would be nothing better than just to let this guy have it because he really deserves it. But, as much as, I would like to say that I'm the sort of person that can fight those, no, I'm human. I have those urges as well. But that extra constraint, knowing that the fallout would be, oh, he's a horrible, that I have to be that sort of exemplar of the tattooed person, helps me control myself, and I welcome that because in the end of the day, I think, we all are our own worst enemies. We all have these urges and stuff that we have to deal with to be good people, and that just helps me be a good person.
Now, reptiles... Actually, I don't know anything about animals, but just go along with this. Reptiles can shed their skin, and I was thinking about... I'm just looking at my own life and about how... I like being different and trying on different uniforms and costumes and angles.
Yeah.
But, I like then trying something else on, especially when you're much younger. When you're a kid, it's like you're a punk one week and then you're a goth and then you're a lizard. But then you're not a lizard. Is it restraining that you can't, like, shed your skin and reinvent yourself in another colourful, creative way?
Well, that was, what you're describing is a process that I very much went through and helped me get to this point. I did a lot of experimenting. I did a lot of art that involves costume and body painting, and I, tried, different cultures and subcultures. Like you said, punk one time in your life, goth the other. And that was, that's part of the process of figuring out who you are. And I'm very lucky to have gotten a good sense of who I was fairly early on to know that this would work for me. That said, I like to play around with a lot of different things. Now, I might not be able to reinvent myself in the way of, somebody who is, like, say, punk one week can go so far goth the next week that they're almost unrecognizable. You'll always recognize that it's me.
Even if you're steampunk lizard.
Yeah, exactly, steampunk lizard. But I feel that I can still do those things, and the fact that it's more difficult for me is actually an appealing challenge. The permanence of what I've done in my body modification was a really big, important point to me as an artist. Because if you look at traditional media, people can paint paintings, make sculptures, take photos, and walk away from them. But when you're a body-based artist, you live with that idea and expression for the rest of your life. So what was once part of me is always part of me. And if that makes it harder for me to go change and explore those things, that's just another level of challenge. And I'm one of those people that always seems to seek out the challenge.
Now, one final question, because we quite regularly on this show, even though there's big gaps in between it, we have conspiracy theorists.
Yes.
Who believe
David Icke.
David Icke, who believe that the secret rulers of the world are actually lizards. And when they close their door, Obama turns into a lizard.
They
now,
shed that
has
facade.
Has that scene ever intersected with your scene?
It has. Very early on when I started to get press and become known in the media in the world, the internet picks up much quicker than anything else. So I've found, through the Google searches on myself, because, I have an ego. I've Googled myself a few times. They do talk about me on the boards, and obviously they recognize that I am not the reptilian alien they're thinking about. But sometimes I like to have a little bit of fun with them. And I actually once wrote an expose on myself under a pen name. It was called The Truth About the Lizard Man by Manuel Lagarto. Now, if you know your Spanish, that's man-lizard translated out. So in my Truth About the Lizard Man, I claimed that I was actually a government experiment to condition people to accept reptilians in the world. By me going out looking like this and being positive, it would make it easier when the reptilians who didn't disguise themselves showed up to infiltrate and take over the world. I mean, a complete send-up of the conspiracy theory, but I think you got to have fun with stuff like that.
Now, thank you very much, Eric.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And I bet you the moment we go off air, you'll kind of turn into like George W. Bush.
Well, no, not. If I was going to change into a politician, I'd probably go more towards Obama than George W. But
Tonight, Sunday Night Safran gets under your skin and into your body.
On Triple J.
We're here together in the studio. He's in charge, of course, John Safran. We're going to catch up with Dr. Dean here, who will tell us the body's role as a compass. Plus, we'll be talking about transableism and other kin, groups of people who feel they belong in another body.
Now, Father Bob Maguire and dear listeners, this is our second last week.
It is too, isn't it? Might
Before
be
we take a
week.
break, we'll be back next year.
In a wheelchair, probably.
But people are asking, hey, John, what can I listen to whilst you're off the air? And I've been listening to other podcasts, so this is what I've been listening to. So, make your own choice. This is the first one I've been listening
to. You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
That'd brighten up your miserable life, wouldn't it?
On March 1st, 2004, Shuvender Shubi Sem at the Mary Rishi University stabbed another student in the face with a pen during a class. Told by university staff that
anyway, so I've been falling asleep to that every night for a couple of weeks. Sometimes I forget to press the right button, so they play again and again and again over the night, and I wake up having these nightmares.
So you're recommending these to the listeners?
Yes.
While we're not available.
True Murder. The reason I started listening, and that guy, his name's host it, Dan Zupansky, the way he interviews the authors, he kind of makes out like he's a bit separate from it. So you kind of take him, he's this authority and he's a reasonable person and he just has this interest in these sort of slightly eccentric people who enjoy hanging around the murder scene, right? But then you Google his name and you find out that Dan Zupansky has a past of his own. Because he was involved in it. I'll get to the trial he was involved with, which involved a serial killer, by the way. But during this trial where he was a witness, it came out that this host had convictions for armed robbery, break and enter, impersonating a police officer, drug trafficking, uttering threats and assaults. And Zupansky also admitted to 3 previous stays in a mental health facility. So that's the guy hosting the True Murder podcast. Yeah. And because one of the things in it, he acts a bit snooty about all these criminals. Like, can you believe where do these ethical... That's why he wants to hang around like serial killers, because compared to serial killers... Yeah, he's a saint.
A white knight, yes.
Because all he is a drug trafficker and police officer impersonator, break and enterer, threatener and assaulter, and has spent 3 stays in a mental health facility. Yeah. It's a good scene, the true crime writers scene. I've been listening to like many episodes of this because it's a real bitchy scene. Because often there's like different writers and they want to get to the one serial killer, and they and they're writing about the same thing at the same time. So they try to undermine the other one. And
do they embellish?
Well, I don't know. There's this woman called Victoria Redstall who's written a book about serial killers, and she kind of gets in there. And her job before she was a serial killer true crime writer was she was an infomercial model. Apparently her specialty was breast enhancement, some kind of breast enhancement cream. And so for whatever reason she wanted to get in, and she's like blonde and tall and tanned, and I think she's from England, but I think she's moved to either America, United States or Canada. Anyway, she got in with this one serial killer, like got through to talk to him in the prison and all that stuff. And it's kind of suggested that maybe she flirted a bit to get to that point. And then there's this other woman who was also writing a book about this same serial killer. And she wrote in her book that blonde woman I was just talking about did in fact do that, like flirted and possibly more to get the interview. So now there's these 2 competing female true crime writers who are like girls on Facebook bitching about each other, all after this one serial killer.
So a genre of its own, John.
A genre, yeah. I want to write a book about people who write books about serial killers.
I think so.
This, but our friend Dan Zapansky, he double-crossed his serial killer. He started writing letters back and forth for his own true crime book, and then he ran off to the prosecution, and then appeared in the court case and double-crossed it. And this is actually from Canada, that podcast.
Yeah.
It's not from America. And he says that he makes out he claims he was quite brave to testify because the laws are really light on for serial killing in Canada. He says that if you can prove like you're drunk or you're insane or whatever, like you're out pretty early in Canada because it's not like the United States. So he says that him going up to the stand, double-crossing the guy who was writing about, meant that in 4 years he could have come out and kind of
settled the debt.
And what this guy did was, anyway, you don't want to know what he did.
No, I don't want to know what he
original
did.
serial killer. I've been listening to this other one
The
too. Not as
promos
much.
are bad enough.
I don't want. This is the other one I've been listening to. You know, change of pace because it's not like every night I want to be listening. This is the other podcast I've been listening to.
Welcome to the Serial Killers Podcast. The Serial Killers Podcast is a weekly podcast exploring the history and the psychopathology of serial murderers. And here's your host, Brian Combs.
Episode 39. Modus operandi, ritual behavior, and signature. Charles Albright removed the eyeballs of his victims. The Zodiac Killer signed his letters with a distinctive
The good
mark
thing about
that
this
included
guy,
a cross and a
if
circle.
we can put, he's got a lisp. So if the thing you like about this show is my lisp, is that's what you like about Sunday Safran, I highly recommend that second one, which is the Serial Killers Podcast, not to be confused with the True Murder podcast. But I can't lie to you, I'm so addicted to the other one. I haven't really had time to listen to that one.
That sounds full of interesting topics for conversation around the water cooler.
You really don't. You lose a lot of authority when you have a lisp on the radio. I've noticed listening to the Serial Killer Podcast with that lispy guy. Goes, yes. So then he followed him up the street, and then he pulled the knife out.
That's not it.
I hope you take me seriously, dear listeners. If I find out you haven't been taking me seriously all these years, just because I have a slight
yes,
impediment,
which you may well
I won't be happy.
But you may well have imposed on yourself.
Oh, yeah.
It needn't be a real lisp.
Oh, sure.
You might be like the lizard man, that you have it acquired.
Oh, do you know who I might be like? Ted Bundy, serial killer, who pretended he had a cast on his arm.
Yeah.
And then, like women, they'd be, oh, the guy's got a cast on his arm. And then that's why they'd get into the van with him.
It's not beyond you. I'm saying. We'll discuss that maybe with some of the experts coming on the show.
Now, who are we talking to after this?
Who are we talking to after this? We're talking to Dr. Dane here.
All the way from overseas.
Yep.
And he's going to be talking to us about just, the body.
Getting under your skin, Sunday Night Safran.
Triple J.
You're listening to Triple J with myself, Bob Maguire, John Safran in charge, of course. And still to come, we're going to talk about people who don't feel comfortable in their existing bodies. We'll find out about the transabled and other kin communities. So stick around to find out more. But right now on Sunday Night Safran, we're joined by Dr. Dane here, who's an international speaker, author and facilitator.
He's in Queensland. He was meant to be in an ABC studio, but apparently the studio blew up or something.
What do you mean blew up?
Well, not blew up, in the vernacular. So he's on the phone. Hey, how are you there, good doctor?
I'm doing great. And yes, in the vernacular, the studio has blown up.
Okay, well, you still...
With a bomb or something?
Theoretically, yeah. But, I'm from the U.S., so we're used to that over there.
Now, what kind of tradition would you put this access consciousness in? Is this like a spiritual tradition? Is this like a self-help tradition?
I don't know that it fits any tradition. It really is about consciousness, and the idea is everything exists and nothing is judged. I'd like to create a new tradition where that could be the norm for our world.
And I guess with spiritual traditions, the people who, write those and advocate for those, they say, oh, listen, I'm basing this on, mystical things, and that's why this makes sense, using that logic. And I guess with self-help, people often use like science or psychology and things like that and say, well, I'm going through that tradition, that's why this makes sense. What What makes access consciousness make sense?
That's a heck of a question. I'm not even sure I can answer that, other than it seems to work to create people who seem to have a greater sense of choice and a greater sense of happiness, and also a greater sense of coming out of judgment of them and other people, where they include everyone more in their lives without sort of needing to separate or judge them or make them wrong or make themselves wrong.
And you had a fairly challenging past, I understand, which kind of propelled you into searching for answers. So when you were young, where did you live?
I lived in a city known as Carson. It was kind of like Compton, California. And literally, the joke that I say is there were three colors where I grew up. There was brown, there was black, and there was me. And so it was like I was literally the only white kid you saw for 8 square miles. And, what I got from that was, wow, I'm a little different. But I didn't even know that until I was 8 years old. I mean, until 8 years old, it's like my friends and I, we just played. My friends were black and Mexican. I was white, but none of us noticed. 8 years old was the first time I got beaten up for being a different color, and I was like, wait a minute, what's a whitey? Because the kid that beat me up was older, and he came up and said, what are you doing here, whitey, and beat the crap out of me. And I was like, Mom, what's a whitey? It's like, but kids don't learn, kids don't come in with judgment. It's something we teach them. What if we could stop?
And so did you get basically your whole upbringing was getting bullied and beaten up?
Actually, no. I mean, I had that. There was a lot of abuse where I was living in the ghetto. And, there was physical abuse, there was sexual abuse, there was, fearing for your life. And so there was that. But it wasn't so much the bullying. That only started about 8 years old. And within a few years, I made it so my mom and I got out of there because I wasn't willing to live that way even at 8 years old. But so I'd experienced a lot of it for a few years, but I'd experienced all the other kinds of abuse that people seem to experience in this reality. And it created this place in my world where later on in life it became the reason why I couldn't create what I wanted to create. It wasn't until about 12 years ago where I went, you know what, either my life changes or I'm out of here. I'm killing myself. I don't care which.
And is that because all those memories were in you and it just, you couldn't think of new things or you couldn't think positively and to propel yourself into, doing new creative things? Why do you think it held you back so much, the bad experiences?
Well, I think that's part of what we learned that is the effect of abuse, is that the people who experience it are victims. And, I certainly had that point of view about myself. When I started looking at this area with my business partner, now the founder of Access Consciousness, we started looking from a totally different place because it wasn't changing things. And the one thing we know is that if you look at something and what happens is when you're actually on the right track, things get lighter, things actually change. And because this wasn't changing, we had to take a totally different track. And I looked at it and I went, wow, okay, so I wasn't the victim that I made myself. In other words, the abuse I experienced didn't destroy me like I thought it did. It actually gave me, when I looked at it later, a sense of the strength that I've actually got and that we all actually have.
And did you start exploring other things that are in the category of self-help or spirituality before you came across Access Consciousness?
Almost everyone you could imagine. I mean, I was a chiropractor and I was doing every alternative chiropractic technique I could. I had done every technique with a 3-letter acronym you could find, every self-help thing imaginable.
Scientology?
No, that was the one I did not do.
What's that one that's a bit like ESL? Is that one? Or?
Oh, I think it was
or EL,
I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do those. I didn't do Scientology or that.
Okay.
Those two that I would never attract.
How about what's that other one that's a bit like Amway, but all of my friends always end up at going to a workshop for the weekend, and they get kind of locked in the room for the weekend. And then
the one where you get locked in the room and you can't actually go to the bathroom?
Yeah, and then you have to and you go around to people telling them you forgive them. What's that one called?
Advanced learning or something.
Is that Landmark? Is that
Landmark, yes.
Landmark,
did you do Landmark?
No, I didn't.
What the hell did you?
Those three. Wow. Okay, forget what I said about having done everything. I did all kinds of other stuff.
And what about, did you do any religious stuff?
Yeah, actually, when I was a kid, one of the coolest experiences of my life was actually becoming a born-again Christian when I was about 12 years old. And, my stepmother, the lady my dad married, she was going to church, and we went to this youth camp, and we went out in the woods, and they said, hey, if you want to, you can ask Jesus into your heart to forgive your sins. And I went, okay. And I went out there and I'm like, Jesus, I don't know if you exist. I read all this stuff in the Bible, but most of the people that are talking about you are so judgmental. I don't really think they're getting what you're talking about. But if you exist and want to come into my heart and forgive my sins, I'd really like that. And I got a sense of peace that I had with me for like 2.5 years it was kind of like being bulletproof, kind of like being joyful in every situation and peaceful. But it eventually went away, unfortunately.
And what was there in Access Consciousness that there wasn't? I should say to listeners, I don't mean this at all as an insult or whatever, but like when I read the web pages for someone like me, an outsider, there's like expressions and phrases, and like the thing that comes to your head is, oh, is this like Scientology? Just so you know.
Well, yeah, I hear that. And, and I'm so grateful if somebody comes up and says, you know what? I'm kind of interested, but this is like Scientology. Is it like Scientology? And my first answer is absolutely not, and only from the place of what I've known from the people I met who've been in Scientology is that what they do is they get you in with the idea that the truth will set you free, which is actually true, but then they say that Scientology is the only truth. At least that's what I've heard. I've never experienced it, so I'm just going to go, And the thing about Access is, and you're the only one who knows what's true for you. I don't know what's true for you, and please, come, get what you want, and leave when you want. That's the other difference is, please, leave when you want. It really is about creating a place where people are empowered to know what they know, not try to buy somebody else's point of view.
This is, I watched one of your little videos, and you said...
I watched one of yours, too.
Uh-oh.
actually, quite a few. And in fact, if you try to tell me to, in my routine, talk about Aborigines, I'm going to question that a little more than Sarah Silverman did. That's all I got to say, all right?
And this is the type of thing in Access Consciousness. You say one of the tools is, what energy, space, and consciousness can I be to have total clarity and ease with all of this?
Yeah. And
everything that doesn't allow that to show up, I now destroy and uncreate it.
Yep.
So how does that play out in someone's life? Like what actually is it just in their heads, or they're meant to take that into practical things and quit their job or get out of a relationship, or what?
Well, actually, the thing is, what's true for you will always make you feel lighter. And a lie will always make you feel heavier. So even when it applies to practical things, like, okay, do I stay in this job or do I get another job? It's like you should always follow what makes you feel lighter, not what somebody else tells you. And please, if you're listening to me, please don't think I'm trying to tell you anything. The only thing I'm trying to get you to do is define what's actually true for you, because then your life works a lot better. And so in this particular statement that you're talking about, basically what happens is a lot of us sort of give up the awareness that we have somewhere along the way. And I think it's sort of almost beaten out of us in this reality. Not beaten, but it's not validated in this reality. And so we know far more about what's right for us and what's true for us than we ever give ourselves credit for. If you can start accessing more of that, it's like you stop trying to live a life that is just about what you were handed and what makes other people happy, and you start to go, wait a minute, what's actually true for me? I mean, if I were to have gone with my childhood, I would have grown up a mean, abusive, racist person. But that's not me. So in finally, in getting to what's actually true for me, I'm like, I'd actually rather be kind to people. I'd rather invite people to the possibilities that they know can exist. So it's really about what's true for you, what's going to work for you, and also inviting people into your life that can help nurture that and have more of that, not less.
And have you ever lost faith in this? Like a lot of people, they lock into something, they get into something for a period of time, and then it's like, oh, enough, I want to get, and oh my God, I've been tricked or whatever, or there's other things. Do you go through that?
Not in the sense, well, let me say this first, is I don't claim to be perfect, and I don't claim that I'm always happy all the time. It's like, what I have noticed is the bummer that used to be my life that was lasting for months on end eventually got to from bummer months, it went to bummer weeks, it went to bummer days, and now it's like, if I have some heaviness or upset or something, if it lasts a few hours, I'm like, okay, this is something major, what's going on here? So the downs have gotten less. But the thing that I love about Access is it's always changing. It's always getting greater. So for me, I haven't gotten to the place where, because we don't do it, and when I say we, I mean me, Gary, the founder, the whole Access organization to the best of our ability, it's like we don't do it from conclusion, like we have the answer. We do it from, hey, you know what, let me ask you questions so you can figure out what's going on, and then let's change those questions as the world changes so we can all move further along.
And one skeptical question. So is this one of those things where you type in your details and you get a free program, and then the next level, you have to fork over a lot of money on your credit card and so on and so on?
That I'm so glad you asked, and the answer is hell no. Because I've done stuff like that too, where they said, "Oh, thanks for asking your question, but you'll get that on the next level." And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to do that to people. I mean, my point of view is if you can ask the question, then you deserve the answer right then. And I'll do my best to give it to you. I don't care whether you're at the very beginning level of these classes or if you're just at an intro class, you know, and you're just going to be there for that 3 hours, or if you're just reading a book, or if it's on a radio interview. I don't care. It's like you deserve to have the answer if you can ask the question.
Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Dane Hare, and enjoy the rest of your time in Australia.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Triple J,
John Safran and Father Bob crawl under your skin.
Still to come, we're going to talk about people who don't feel comfortable in their existing bodies. We'll find out about the transabled and other kin communities. Bob Maguire and John Safran in charge. You're listening to Sunday Night Safran.
2.5 Men star Angus T. Jones.
Is it filth or not?
He's the little boy in 2.5 Men, and he's grown up now. But he's hooked up with this Christian leader.
Yeah.
I think he's a Jehovah's Witness. His name's Christopher Hudson, and now he's gone on the warpath, but then backed away, calling his own TV show like a tool of Satan.
Yes.
Telling people not to watch his own TV show.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes. This guy he's followed, this kind of slightly eccentric Jehovah's Witness, says things such as Jay-Z is part of the Illuminati, and that his blueprint albums have special markers in them that point to Jay-Z obtaining degrees in the Freemasons. In another claim, he's exposed Barack Obama's pro-gay agenda and likens the president to Hitler, and he's actually part of the New World Order, etc., etc., etc.
Oh dear, here we go again. But a good actor? You were 2.5 Men, 3.5 Men, 2.5 Men. You don't watch it?
Well, I've watched it.
Yeah, but you're not a devotee or anything.
Yeah.
Would be like if I turned around and sent on this show. Listen, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, this is a show dedicated to Satan and evil. Don't listen to it.
Now, I noticed you weren't at the J Awards.
I wasn't invited to the J Awards, was I? I wouldn't have been able to get up the stairs with a stick.
They were in...
Stella, were Stella at the J Awards?
No, she wasn't at the J. Are you trying to, build some little plot here? Stella, who's in a wheelchair, you with a walking stick.
Yeah.
That somehow we're against...
Well, you've kept us
people
out.
with afflictions.
Yeah.
First of all, I found it hard to get to the... Because I don't like making a big deal at the door. Like going...
Excuse me, do you know who I am?
There was a long queue to get to the J Awards, and I had to be up there to do a live cross. Like, it was my employment. My job, was to get up the stairs. But I still had these sort of, hang-ups from... I don't want to, walk to the front of the queue and then get knocked back by the bouncer.
No.
Anyway, I walked to the front of the queue, and he's like, oh, listen, you can't come in. Then on top of that, he told me I looked like John Safran, and he really likes John Safran. So I was simultaneously not allowed in, denied by the bouncer, who, yeah.
What a complicated life.
So I did. So I said, "Oh, listen, I've got to."
I am John Safran. Didn't you watch?
Anyway, so I got up there, and I got to hang out with the Triple J people.
Yeah.
We went out for dinner afterwards or whatever. Because I build them up in my head as quite scary because they're there and we're vulnerable here.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So.
Who was there? Doctor Who?
Chris Scadden. Ooh. Who's like the Grand Poobah.
Yeah, you didn't drop anything.
We had a little conversation about...
My age?
No, not your age, Bob. About product placements. I kind of dobbed on you, Bob.
What? Because I what? Because
Alex from Tom and Alex brought up that had sent him this package where his name was on the bottle. And anyway, it was like one of these little tricks where they're trying to get celebrities to...
Yeah, of course.
Talk about it or whatever. Yeah. And then I said we've never stumbled, we've never done anything like that, except occasionally, dear listener, you probably don't notice this because I always throw things at Father Bob over the 5 years.
Come on.
But occasionally you'll start an anecdote, a little story, Bob, where...
About a product.
It'll be apropos to nothing, you're talking about your hairdresser. And I'm like, what's going on? And I'm like, I wonder where this is going to go to. Like, where's it? And then I realised when it's too late, all you did, you got a free haircut, and then you are giving a plug to the local hairdresser on Triple J.
The chair I bought the other day, thank you very much, that tips you out because you can't. You know, I've convinced myself that I'm worse than my friend Stella. So I've had to get a chair, for God's sake.
Yeah, go on.
Now, am I now going to tell you who is the place that I got the chair from?
Right.
That would be a product placement.
Anyway, no product placements, not even local hairdressers, Bob.
What about teeth enhancement?
Listen, I don't want to start trouble with people from other Triple J shows.
You're wearing a thing on your chest now. That's product placement, isn't it?
I don't want to badmouth anyone from other shows.
Well, of course not.
But I will say this. If you've kissed Alex from Tom and Alex, he's got a photo of you on his iPhone that he pulls out and shows people. I'll just leave it at that. He pulled out the phone, and suddenly I'm looking at this girl, and it's like this hot girl, and it's like, what's the... Apropos to what, Alex, are you showing me this? And it's just like, oh, no, I've kissed her. Weird. But that's it. I don't want to talk anymore about it.
No, blue. So I think we've run out. Don't you? Last show for the year.
Do you know I did American picking this week in Ringwood, which is a suburb in Melbourne? I was there, driving there for work, and then on the side of the road there was a porcelain dog that someone was throwing out, and I stopped the car.
Couldn't help yourself.
Yes. I, of course, made it a social media event where I tweeted, should I take this
pictures?
dog?
Did you take a photograph?
Should I take this dog or not? So I took the dog. It had its nose knocked off, so it actually looks like a bit like a horror dog, depending on, like, it's quite, because like you can see like spiders crawling into the face of the porcelain dog.
Yeah.
And I left it outside. I thought, listen, I'll just leave it outside my place, out the back, not out the front on the street, out the back. I'll just leave it out there one night to decide whether to bring it up or not. Gone. Overnight.
Dear God.
They wouldn't make such a rookie's error on American pickers.
No. So you didn't go and knock on the door and say, excuse me, are you really asking for this porcelain dog to be taken? You didn't do that.
It was pretty obvious. It was
pretty obvious. Yeah, fair enough. All right, what's next?
I was reading your Twitter feed, Bob. This is one of your entries.
Oh, look, it's getting a bit pathetic.
This is Bob. Advised yesterday, my time on TV was over.
Oh, God.
Because
don't go over that.
Garrulous, long-winded, and humour too cryptic.
Yes.
Snide humour the go these days.
Yes, that's what I was told. Snide. You've got to be snide.
So, where have you been bumped? Have you been bumped?
No, I haven't been bumped. I'm saying that I've got the impression over the last... I'm deteriorating. And you see, I'm talking myself into the position where, in fact, I will go into hiding. But see, a couple of people do... I say, excuse me, why haven't they got us on X program?
Like the project or something, yeah.
And they say, well, look, Bob, as a matter of fact, see, the fashion's changed. You can't go on there and sit and talk and bump the bloody the presenter and take over the show and expect to be asked back. Garrulous, get to the point, comrade. And like you say, no anecdotes that go back to 1914. It's got to be snide, sharp and quick and nasty, you know. So I'm practising, you know what I mean?
Okay, practice. Give me a snide, quick and nasty story or insult.
Oh, it's snide and no, I can't.
Oh, by the way.
What?
Yeah, I forgot. Your biographer said that you like me.
Oh, hello. What a snide remark that is. Eh? That what I put down.
Did
she? What,
yeah.
She set you up?
No, she said I was talking to Bob and Bob said he liked you.
He likes John. Yeah, well, what am I going to say? Love John? You can't go there. You know what I mean?
Well, you've never said that. I
wouldn't
have screamed at you for 5 straight years had I known you liked me.
Well, we've been running this kind of competition, you know, between two Alzheimer's. Not Alzheimer's, what's that other thing? Asperger's. To find out where is the acceptable common ground, isn't it? And I'm a bit disappointed that, in fact, you didn't bring the dog over to my place and leave it outside the shop front. It would have been perfect there.
You are right.
Yeah.
Now
just a little gesture every now and again of appreciation. You know what I mean?
I bought all the cakes for your birthday.
Yeah, but they were no good, the cakes. Let's have a snide remark. All right? Those cakes had been somewhere else. You know what I mean? They had teeth marks on them.
You can continue
All right.
your Snydery
Tarts with teeth
with
marks.
Stella,
Yes, no, Stella's a master.
who will be coming in here. We're going to be talking about
We're talking to Dr. Fiona Kumar Campbell and Stella Young on
About what?
transableism.
transableism. That's
Yes.
where you want to be in someone else's body,
Thank you.
maybe even the body of someone with
Thank
an
you.
affliction.
Thank you.
Sunday night Safran gets under your skin.
Triple J.
Bob Maguire, John Safran, of course, in charge. Shortly we'll catch up with PhD candidate Venetica Robertson, who will tell us all about the other kin community, people who believe they belong to another species. And now joining us to talk about transableism in the studio, Stella Young, and the ABC's ramp-up editor, and over the phone, Dr. Fiona Kumar Campbell.
No, Fiona Kumar Campbell is the Associate Professor, Deputy Head of School.
Isn't that what I said?
Yeah, something like that. Hey, Fiona, how are you?
Hi, it's Kumari Campbell. Hi, good.
Sorry about that.
So,
I've just finished a lecture on transableism, so I'm rearing to...
Oh, you're raring to go.
and we've got Stella Young here, who was
Not
on
Lung.
Q&A. Well done on your Q&A appearance. Don't apologise. Don't talk. I know what it's like when you go on. You want to talk for the next week about, I wish I said this, I wish I didn't say that.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I'd punched someone in the face.
Oh.
No, nothing like that.
Now, now, can you tell us about transableism, Fiona?
Yes. Well, look, transableism, look, it's a very trendy in term at the moment, but it really relates to a whole cluster of very diverse people. They're people who most of the time would be identified as able-bodied, but they're not necessarily. They can actually be disabled people themselves. And, of course, these are all very loose terms, but they're people who feel incomplete in their existing bodies. They feel incomplete because they have a desire of a long-term nature to either, and these are just examples, to either have an amputation or become paralysed or to be deaf. So they have a desire to have a disability. It's not just some kind of commodity desire that they'd like to have that. These are people who feel incomplete in their completeness. And I'm using these terms advisedly because it raises issues about what those terms mean.
Now, this is going to sound offensive. I don't mean this to be offensive. I just kind of want to know the answer, right? There's not an aspect to this where there's cachet in victimhood and... No, not at all. So it's not like, that'd be cool if I had this because then...
No, John, and look, actually there's nothing offensive about what you're saying. I think this is a very unusual thing. I've just been working with some students now and, it can make some people's stomachs churn. There's all sorts of body modifications that people want. Some of them that kind of make my hair stand on end. But in fact, one of the things I looked at in my own work, because I'm not a psychologist by training, I'm a sociologist and law graduate by training. And what I was interested in was what are these people's attitudes towards disability? Have they met people with disabilities? Have they, was it a particular event that stimulated this? And what I found, in fact, that many of these people, who, by the way, because they're unable to obtain the surgical modification, many of those people, and there's lots of them around, live the life of a disabled person, a bit like a transgendered person who's living in the opposite gender, as part of a transition. They usually have very good disability politics. They've had to confront ableism. They've had to confront attitudes about disability. They don't most of these people don't associate disability with victimhood or necessarily with suffering. Obviously, they're aware of the particular kind of realities. But, look, there might be the oddball among them. But
Sure.
One thing I have found, if I may say, John, is that many of these people have had years and years of psychotherapy. Many of them, in fact, are trained psychologists and psychotherapists themselves. They've struggled with it. In all intents and purposes, they're pretty normal, okay people, except within this respect that many of us don't understand.
Stella, have you confronted people who have transableism?
No, I've never met anyone who is transabled, but I'm really fascinated, and I'm really particularly fascinated.
Now, we've brought, just so people know, you're in a wheelchair.
Yes, I'm a wheelchair user.
But can I say, so am I as well. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, stop showing off, Stella. We've
I've
got
got
someone
a
else in a
walking
wheelchair.
stick. I've got a walking
Bob's got a walking stick. I've got a lisp.
And I've been in a wheelchair longer because I think I'm older than Stella.
Oh, look at this. We're competition, for God's sake.
Yes.
You probably have been, but yeah. But I like that the able-bods outnumbered. I think that's cool in this scenario. But look, transableism is something that I find really fascinating. And what I find that people can have a different body image to what they, what the reality is. Really easy to understand, because that's a little bit like being transgender, I assume. It's more relatable to that. What I struggle with a little bit more are people who are disability pretenders, who actually have no desire.
That's different.
To have the actual body modification, but they live. I was reading the blog of this guy who lives as a paraplegic.
Okay, can I respond to that? Because I think the problem is we have different categories, and the media often, and John, you wouldn't do this, but often confuses these categories. So there are the disability pretenders. I call them disability cross-dressers. They're like the men that like to put on their wives' bras and underpants, but at the end of the day, do they want to be female? Probably not. But so there's that group. But I guess we're talking about this other group, and with transgender reassignment surgery, often what happens, doctors will say, are you sure if you're a man, are you sure you want to become a woman? You need to live as a woman, for 1 year or 2 years, before even any hormone treatment, let alone surgery takes place. What I've found, and I have met these people and interviewed some of these people, is many of them, we're talking about decades of people waiting for a doctor to either do the surgery or whatever. Many of those people, in many ways, this is like a transitionary period for them.
So I guess when it comes to gender, people, it's either true or they convince themselves it's true. It's that the mind of a woman will be different to the mind of a man, and so that informs their decision on wanting to cross over. Is there some equivalence here, or like what?
Well, can I say to you, there's not been lots and lots of research done on this. I did come across an individual, and one thing I found is that I came in with the same attitudes that many people in the community. I started off my research on disability devotees, and John, they're people who are turned on by disabled people and find disabled people erotic and attractive, and their disabilities themselves. They're a different group. We've got our pretenders. Our disability wannabes or transabled people, one thing I found with many of those people is that the ones who... they're so desperate to get the surgery, one thing that often what they do is they may go and lie on a railway track or use dry ice or put a gun to their...
I'm confused by the legality. Are you allowed to have body modification done in Australia where you're made disabled because you have a desire?
Well, this is a complicated thing, and this is one thing we talked in our class. There's a performance artist, for example, who's got an ear growing off his arm at the moment, and he got it done through a cosmetic surgery process. But this is the whole thing. I mean, we have this division, and it's an artificial division between what's called positive and negative enhancement. Unfortunately, any kind of move towards disability is seen as a negative enhancement, and yet there's all sorts of things you can do with your body. Make yourself into a cat man. There's the kind of the boob job from hell, where the boobs are so large you're going to fall over. There's breaking people's legs, which happens in Korea.
It happens. There was an Australian politician who went over, I think, to Russia. I could be wrong about the country, and had her legs broken so that she could be taller.
But that's a common practice in Korea at the moment with young teenage girls, where they break the leg, following Western beauty ideals, and then put leg extenders in and do the screws over a period of time.
But it's interesting because a lot of short-statured people with conditions like achondroplasia, are encouraged to have that kind of surgery, that limb-lengthening surgery, to make them taller, to make them more normal. If it's people who don't already have an existing condition, we see it as freakish and wrong.
Exactly.
But if it's trying to make disabled people more normal, then we're okay with it. No.
Yeah, but in that case, we can get our heads around it, because it's like the society says this is aesthetically pleasing, or I want to fit in, or whatever, so I'm going to do that. What's the mental landscape of someone who wants to become disabled?
What's the mental landscape of an able-bodied person who says that, John, with due respect to yourself? Because actually, for me, being disabled is aesthetically pleasing. I'm a really hot woman, John. I mean, I'll see pictures at some stage. So I guess what the issues are is, again, this is this kind of notion about the kind of social control of aesthetics and what is beauty.
So you're saying that the people who want to get this done, they find that beautiful, so that's why they want to do it?
Oh, no, I'm not actually saying I wouldn't want to put motivations on this, because most of these people, it's at a very primal level. They feel incomplete within their bodily system. I interviewed one man who, for 65 years, John, who had lived with this issue, depression, self-abuse, you name it, his wife nagging him, that could even be worse maybe, and he eventually went to, got one of his legs removed, not legally, because you can't get it done legally in many places in the world. And it's interesting, within 2 or 3 days, a lot of his mental health systems abated. 3 or 4 years onwards, he is a man who is totally well, fully functioning in the community. So the issue is, that's why many of these groups now are calling for Transableism to become part of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, to have it pathologised so that they then can go through the medical process of getting access to this surgery.
People are saying that, oh, listen, don't think this is so unusual or so abnormal or whatever, but doesn't pathologising it push it into that category?
I have some real concerns with that too, and that was what we were discussing today. I mean, but transgenderism also has been pathologised, and I guess it comes back to who has the right to regulate bodies. I mean, I made the point when we were preparing for the program that, like, for example, we have another trend in a different area, John, where people with cochlear implants, they had cochlear implants put in when they were children. There's a whole group of people in their 20s now, 20s, mid-20s, late 20s, who can't get their implants removed because there's no medical reason they need them removed. I mean, you can get it removed if there's an infection, but they can't get their cochlear implants removed. The only way they can be removed is through surgical intervention yet again. So what they're doing is switching them off. So I guess what we're talking about, who are the people who are the gatekeepers as to what is normal?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yes.
Who decides?
Absolutely. And I think that it's really important to remember that these decisions, this is all happening in a social context where disability is seen as an inherently negative thing. As a disabled woman, I value my life enormously, and I would not want to not have my disability. That doesn't mean that I pretend that living with my impairment is all beer and skittles. And I would have trouble relating to a person who wanted to have the same challenges as me, I suppose, the same restricted access to public transport, the same, people yelling out really condescending things to me on the street, like slow down, speedy, kind of absolute stuff that drives me bonkers. That's all social stuff. That's not about my disability or my impairment. That's about society.
Exactly.
I find it really confronting that somebody would want to buy into that. It's not the body stuff. I wonder why someone would want to become a disabled person and deal with all of that other crap that we've got to deal with.
And I'm just wondering if I can respond to that, because that came up in our discussions about there's some kind of just a choice there. Many people would say this is an ongoing compulsion that's there. It's not about sitting back and having a free choice. And I know, Stella, you might not have meant this, but I know that, as a lesbian woman, that was one of the big issues that, people have said to me, why would you want to be lesbian? You're going to have this, that and the other. You're going to have lack of recognition of relationships, yada, 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 yada. But the issue is, from my perspective, it's not a thing about sitting back saying, I think I will or I won't or whatever. And these kinds of analogies are there. Many of these people aren't just necessarily saying, this is some novelty thing I'd like to do, or it's some kind of fetish. This is how I'm reading it across a range of populations. I've spoken to a fairly diverse bunch of people. They are aware, by the way, they're people who are aware of the social inequalities, the real issues around access, social exclusion, pain, if it's a pain-related impairment, etc.
Finally, what numbers are we talking about? Are we talking about such a small amount of numbers? It's more in the category of the world's just a complex place, and there's a very small amount of people who are like this, and so.
I think it's really interesting, John, because with disability devotees, and there's been lots of media done on that, the traditional portrayal is it's mainly men who are turned on by disabled women, particularly amputees for some reason. What I've discovered with this group, it's men and women. Many of these people are able-bodied, or who we identify as able-bodied. Some of them, in fact, are disabled people themselves with some other kind of impairment issue. We don't know how many people are out there. My gut level feeling, however, is there's more than we think that are out there, and there are many people who are living these kind of hidden lives.
Thank you very much for joining us, Fiona, and educating us, and thank you, Stella, also for educating us.
Thanks for having me.
Getting under your body skin. Sunday Night Safran.
On Triple J.
You're listening to Sunday Night Safran with Bob Maguire and myself. Over there, John Safran in the chair. And joining us right now is Venezia Robertson, PhD candidate at the University of Sydney, who's doing research on the other kin.
Hello, how are you?
I am very well, thanks.
Now, can you tell us what this otherkinism is?
Otherkinism. Well, if I had to give it a very basic definition, I think I would say that somebody who calls themselves an otherkin, or otherkin can be the collective term, that would refer to somebody who identifies as something other than human. So they might agree that they had a human body, but some part of them, some very intrinsic part of them, their soul or their personality is not human.
So what things are not human?
Things that are other. All sorts of things. The sort of substratas, if you want me to give you some
just give us some examples. Do you mean things like
subgroups?
Vampires and elves and fairies and gods and stuff?
Absolutely. So you're doing great.
Unicorns and griffins.
Yeah, absolutely, unicorns and griffins. In fact, I would say that unicorns and griffins are my specialty. I like to work on therianthropes, which are a specific kind of otherkin. They're, if you break down the word from the Greek, therianthrope, you get therios for beast and anthrope for man. So people that think that they are both human and animal, and as you pointed out, sometimes mythical animals.
We tried to get an otherkin person on, but they're very shy. Here's an email. I'm afraid us otherkin are a skittish and shy bunch. Those who truly believe that they were a mythical beast, god, elf, or fairy in a past life or original form tend not want to talk about it unless it's on an otherkin forum, and view those who do come forward with suspicion. Yada yada yada. So do these people? So they're not just role playing. They actually believe they have like the inner being of a unicorn.
Yes, I think that the otherkin community in general looks down upon the idea that they are role playing. They would say they're completely not role-playing, and anybody that wants to role-play, that's all well and good, but they're not really welcome in the otherkin community because this is for people that are very serious about their affiliations with other than human beings.
And what about aesthetically? Do they dress up as these different creatures?
Obviously, that's a personal choice. I think that actually, for many otherkin, it makes them feel a little bit more at home in their bodies, to dress or to modify their bodies so that they reflect what they see to be as their true self.
Because somebody told me today they were in a hotel in the US of A, and it made accommodation for otherkin. So in the room there'd be a kennel or something where the person could feel, you know what I mean, at home.
Right.
And I'm not being facetious. I mean seriously. That I've never had any experience of it. But people walking, if they think that they're a feline, they've got the tail out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, in the.
Do we see? Maybe I'm not going in the right places, but I mean, are there people walking around the streets of any of our cities who are otherkin and who do? Let it all hang out, so to speak?
Well, I guess it depends on what you've got to hang out. So
Yeah.
I know that I've seen at least some teenagers with tails attached to the backs of their pants.
Yeah.
I guess if you think that your spirit has a tail, then it's useful for you to kind of have a tail sometimes.
Yeah.
But if you think that you're something, for example, that isn't even human shaped, so if you think you're, now I can't think of a good example, but if you think you're a unicorn and having a horn attached to your head and walking around the streets like that is going to get you maybe the wrong kind of attention. And is
But you
that
couldn't
really...
be arrested, could you?
Probably not.
No.
If you thought you were some kind of a naked deity and you wanted to run around with no clothes on, it might be a
yes, I
different
see what you
story.
mean.
And
But if you think that you're an alien and your body is maybe nebulous, it doesn't even have any kind of shape to it at all, that's going to be a little bit tricky for you to embody in your everyday persona.
So if you're an elf, what do you think's happening in the world? What do you think about all these humans walking about?
Do you mean how do they think that they became elves, or do you mean how do they relate to other human beings?
Both.
Okay, well, let's start with one. Let's start with, say, origin stories. Why did you end up an elf in a human's body? For some, that's a very cruel fate. They don't want to be humans. They don't want to have to associate with humans. They want to go and live in elf land. Reasons for that? Possibly reincarnation. That is a popular explanation that I find amongst otherkin. Another one is an idea of sort of interbreeding, that, some generations back, some lucky elf made it with a human, and so you might have a little elf blood in you. So that's why you feel like your spirit doesn't exactly reflect your human shape. But as to how other kin feel in general towards humans, I mean, that's going to vary between individuals.
Has there been an outbreak of hobbits since the film?
That's a very good question. And to be honest, what we as researchers know about the other community is that its sort of modern day origins really do lie in the 70s with Tolkien fandom and other such things. So not just Tolkien fandom, but I'm going to say that's definitely a massive contributor.
I like the trees, but I mean, I suppose you can't go walking around the street as an 8-foot tree or something.
You mean like as an ent?
They're nice, the ents. I like the ents.
How, in your experience, how do people stick this out for their whole life, or is it a phase? And then what happens when they have children?
This is the kind of quantitative data that is really hard to get, obviously, without having to do an incredibly long study. And because the community is so fresh, so let's say starting with the internet, that's when we get a really large digital community of people who identify as otherkin. That's when the term otherkin starts to really be used. And we've only been able to chart that for, say, a decade. So it's really hard to say. Definitely there are people online who have been there since, they'll say, the very beginning. But it is also very popular amongst younger people, I think especially teenagers, but also adolescents. So time will tell.
Time will tell. Because some devotees of Christianity and the mainstream religion say everyone else talks a big game or a good game, but when it comes down to it, yet you have intergenerational, Christian families where the great-grandparents and the grandparents and the parents and the children are all Christian. But when it comes to these other things, they, even things like Norse religions and witchcraft and all these other things, like you rarely have the same intergenerational thing going on.
Do you mean like, are they going to raise otherkin children?
Yes.
This is a question I've been asked before, and I don't know because I've never spoken to any otherkin that had children. It is an awesome question. I'm dying to find out the answer. But what I can, all I can really say on that front is that definitely a lot of otherkin come from families who, for example, just because so many of the ones I speak to are from America, did have Christian upbringings. It is a source of some anxiety for them to have to break with some of their Christian beliefs and face that with their families. Having said that, there are definitely Christian Therians. There are people that have, Christian otherkin, who have no problem syncretizing their Christian faith with their non-human selves, which is very modern.
Venetia, I believe your studies are particularly about looking at otherkinism and transgenderism, is that right?
Yes, that's right. It's not something that I thought I was going to be looking at, but I found there was such an interesting correlation between people that thought that their spirit didn't match their body and people that thought that their gender didn't match their body.
Yes, and what were the findings after you went and found all these people and put them in cages and tested them over the months?
That's right, because I have the resources to do that, naturally.
I like how you don't have a moral problem with going out and capturing people in giant butterfly nets and putting them in cages.
Could do that.
It's just that you don't have the resources to do it yet.
If I could, I would. Unfortunately, I'm very limited in my ethics clearance as to what I can do. And I'm really looking forward to starting my fieldwork. I haven't really done it yet, so all of my fieldwork so far is passive. I spend a lot of time on the internet, trawling websites and forums and putting little pieces of the puzzle together. But one thing that is particularly interesting and what I'd like to focus on in my studies is the correlation between transgenderism and what these people refer to as transspeciesism. So all the ideas surrounding body dysmorphia or body dysphoria, a sense of really hating your physical form because it doesn't match the person within, those ideas translate into the otherkin community really strongly. Obviously not for everybody, but for those who feel a sense of great discomfort in their human skin.
Bob.
Yeah, no,
Bob's the opposite. Bob's too comfortable in your skin.
Yeah, but I'm just interested in how society, with all its penchant for law and order, can cope with people. What will they have on their passports, Human species, tick, or other? Isn't it? What the rules and regs, what are they going to do? If you're a cat, you can't do this. And
well,
it's mind-boggling, isn't it? I'm saying it's a challenge.
it is definitely a challenge, and a lot of people see it as completely unfeasible. But for those particularly dedicated other kin, they don't see a difference between identifying as gender fluid or androgynous and identifying as whatever the equivalent of species androgyny is.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with all your studies, and
Thank you very
hope
much.
you get enough research money to go out and capture people and put them in cages.
Oh, I'll let you know when I do. Pleasure talking to you,
Ta-da!
gentlemen.
Triple J, John Safran, and Father Bob crawl under your skin.
You're listening to Sunday Night Safran, Bob Maguire, John Safran.
Father Bob, what are you reading at the moment?
What am I reading? I'm not reading much.
I finished that other book.
I'm reading at the moment, for God's sake. Go on.
I finished. Remember that other book I was carrying around? That big book by
Yes, the big book.
Errol
Yes,
Morris.
yes.
The problem with it was a very beautiful book, but it was like dating a haemophiliac. It's like there was like nothing I could do to this book that didn't like damage it. Like I'd carry it around in my bag and get scuffed. And I was like, okay, so now I have to hold it in my hand. But when I held in my hand, like the oil from the palm of my hand damaged the book. It was. But now I'm onto a
tiny book, that is, isn't it?
A little paperback.
What's that
you
one?
can throw around. This is called The Adversary, and it's about this guy. It's a true story. You'll be unsurprised to know about murder and deception.
Oh, that's a surprise, isn't it?
And it's this guy. I think you should read it if you're in first year uni, because it's this guy made a lie in first year uni. It's French. It was originally a French book, and he lied and said he passed this exam. He was studying medicine. That would then lead him to, go to second year and third year and then become a doctor. And he did this lie, and he just spent the rest of his life having to cover that. So his best friends thought he was working at the World Health Organization in Geneva as this top doctor, and he had a wife. I'm only halfway through the book, so I don't know how much he deceived his family or whatever. But all the murders that happened that you find out at the start of the book, so I'm not ruining it for you, happened because the world finally came crashing in. And so he ends up killing his family and his parents.
Oh, God.
Blah, 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 it's all got to do with this one morning where he just said, I'm not going to turn up to that exam.
Yeah,
man, he's stranger than the cat people.
Isn't he?
Thank you to everyone who joined us on this specially themed show, including Lizard Man, Eric.
One more to go. One more to go. This will be like the last. Next.
Dr. Dane here.
Yes.
From Access Consciousness. Can we also thank Stella Young, and Fiona, Kumari Campbell, who taught us all about Transableism, and thank you to Venetia Robinson, who taught us about other kinism.
Yes, and don't forget, stay tuned for Fenella Kernebone for Sound Lab, and don't forget to have breakfast with Tom and Alex tomorrow morning on Triple J.
Download the podcast at just go to triplej.net.au/ just click podcast. It's not that hard. Or go to iTunes or go to SoundCloud, and you can listen to anything you missed out on.
And if you think you're a hobbit,
go
and see The Lord of the Rings.
Correct. And you can follow Bob on Twitter, on Father Bob, me on Twitter, John Safran, or the producer, the Turkish woman, Sopel, and her name is Soipl. And that's that.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Ta-da!